I'm a really big fan of those Wired autocomplete interviews where they have some sort of professional come on and answer the most burning questions from Twitter. So today I'm going to kind of be doing my own version of that. I couldn't find a lot of good questions on Twitter, to be honest, but I did find some good ones on this app called Quora. So today I'm going to be answering all drum, music, guitar, production, singing relating questions on Quora. Let's just call this musician support. Before I keep going, I just want to quickly mention that I now have a Patreon. I'm putting courses on there for people that want to learn how to use Logic Pro or how to play guitar if you're on a completely beginner level. I will also be putting all of my unreleased original music on there. I want to keep doing more courses in the future, like how to use Final Cut, how to use a camera, all things that relate to music content creation. Because I'm not going to be super active on there like every single week, it's just $1. There's only one tier, trying to keep it extremely cheap for everybody. Click the link in the description below if you want to check it out. This first question comes from Russell Spear. What is the reason why guitar playing was so bad in grunge music? To be honest, a lot of people who play grunge music aren't like super well trained, and that's actually not a knock on it. I think that that's kind of the charm of grunge music. When I was recording a cover of Heart-Shaped Box with Verse 211, I remember it took me an extra day to record the guitars because, to be honest, every time I played it, it just sounded too polished, too good, too refined, and that's not really what the spirit of grunge is about. A lot of time the spirit of grunge is just needing to get this artistic idea out so badly that you don't even care if you can actually play the instrument very proficiently. The thing that a lot of people want to be able to do when they play guitar is play power chords, because if you can play power chords, you can kind of get away with playing anything. So it's kind of one of the first things that a grunge guitar player is super driven to try and learn. I will say though, there are some pretty convincing rumors that Kurt Cobain, one of the most famous grunge guitar players of all time, was actually extremely talented. There are like personal anecdotes of Dave Grohl saying that Kurt used to shred and sweep and do all this crazy stuff, but he just couldn't bring himself to kind of give into this persona that he was extremely talented and hardworking at the guitar, and he kind of wanted to be seen more or less as like the grunge guy. Whether or not that's true, I guess we will never really know, but that is just kind of like a rumor that's been tossed around. This next question comes from Thomas Lungstrom. Is there a musical reason why guitars have dots at 3, 5, 7, 9, and 12? Can you explain it in a way someone with minimal music knowledge can understand? I'd be happy to. So those are called fret markers. Fret markers do pretty much exactly what you would think they do. They just show you where you are on the guitar. It helps you navigate around the fretboard so that you don't have to just look into a sea of little metal rods and wood and try and figure out where you are. It also helps people know who are transitioning from knowing just like the frets to the actual note names like A, B, C, D, E, G sharp, whatever, to actually have some sort of reference point to where their hands need to be. Interestingly, at the 12th fret, there are 2 dots. That's because you have now restarted all of your notes. It also perfectly bisects your guitar. So that is the midpoint of your guitar from the nut to the tail, and that note is the same exact note as your open string. This next question comes from Richard Fox. What are some questions why guitar might be a better choice than piano or drums as your first instrument if you're just starting out with playing music? One reason I can think of is because on pretty much any instrument you play, you're going to be learning rhythm, but you have to be playing a pitched instrument to learn about things like harmony. So that kind of eliminates the drums. I do think that piano is actually a really good first instrument to learn because it's a lot more linearly laid out than a guitar, but I think that guitar is also really good because it teaches you a lot more about fine motor skills. Playing a piano and hitting some drums are motor skills that we can kind of already do in our daily lives. Like typing on a piano is very similar to typing on a keyboard. Hitting a drum, you kind of do that motion somewhat frequently, at least more frequently than the motions of strumming a guitar or fretting notes. There's definitely some advantages there to taking on the more difficult kind of motor skill thing. The third thing that I was thinking of is if you want to record things, guitar is kind of the only real instrument you need to know how to play. There currently is not really any convincing AI guitar playing yet, at least not that I'm aware of, but there is super convincing AI drumming and AI piano and AI bass and AI everything basically except for guitar. It's just very difficult to nail those kinds of articulations. AI singing is like slowly coming along, but I think that knowing how to play guitar if you want to get into recording or music production of any kind is kind of the only really essential instrument that you should know how to play. Next question is from Robin Wilson. Why do so many people think playing the drums is easy? I love this question. I think people probably think it's a little bit easy because it's one of the lowest kind of barrier to entry instruments that there is. Like I said in the last question, you do the motions of like hitting things a lot more frequently than you do for some other instruments. I think that also because drumming is so heavily dependent on counting, and if you can count to 4, I mean, I've said this script to like every new student I've ever taught, but if you can count to 4, then you can kind of do it. That's not the full story, of course, but I think everything that you learn in drums is kind of based off these very rudimentary things that you've learned from like normal child development. Versus again, guitar, when you're in kindergarten, you're not learning about pitch and harmony and music theory, and you're not learning like fine motor skills that are like that. You're learning fine motor skills that are like this more than anything. Next question comes from Ron Restorff, whose bio says used to be a drummer and still can't dance to the music. I love that. Okay, why do we cross our arms over to play the hi-hat on a standard drum kit? So the reason that we kind of cross our arms, at least like the modern day interpretation of this, I feel like I have deja vu answering this question for some reason, is because you usually want to keep your snare drum on a very consistent hand. What I mean by that is that when you cross your arms to play on the hi-hat, your left hand stays on the snare drum. But if I want my right hand to now play on a crash cymbal over here, I want my left hand to stay on the snare drum. If I play a floor tom, I want my left hand to play on the snare drum. If I play the ride cymbal, I want my left hand to stay on the snare drum. You can play openly, which just means that your right hand stays on the snare drum like this, but when you cross over to other things, you're crossing your arms, which is fine because we've talked about crossing our arms, but there's two important things to note. If you were to keep your right hand on the snare drum and you to reach across your body, the distance from the ride cymbal to your snare drum versus the hi-hat to your snare drum is usually farther. So you're gonna be crossing and reaching, which is not very good. The other thing is that whenever you wanna play on your floor tom, which is supposed to be about level height with your snare drum, you're gonna be reaching over and then kind of reaching downward to hit it, where your hi-hat is actually elevated from your snare drum, so it's a more natural position. So you're kind of making a compromise either way, whether you play normally or you play openly. But I think that playing normally with cross stick on the hi-hat is going to just suit you better in the long run. And also, a very typical drum fill, or the movement or the linearity of a drum fill, starts on your snare drum and moves around to your toms. We call it a right leading fill because you want to start it with your right hand. So that way when you're done, you finish on beat 1 with your right hand, which for most people is their dominant hand. But if you play openly and you start with a left leading fill, you're now crossing your body onto beat 1, which means it takes you more time to get back over to your hi-hat. We have a question from Jax that says, what are some reasons why bands use so many different tunings? Most bands really only have 2 kinds of tunings. There's standard tunings and then there's drop tunings. Let's talk about standard tuning, or E standard tuning, which is just like the universal tuning for guitars in Western music. Your thickest string is an E, then A, D, G, B, and your thinnest string is also an E. You can take all of these intervals, like the interval from the note E to A, and the interval from A to D, and you can tune all of them down by the same amount, and you will still get a standard tuning. But let's say instead of your thickest string being the note E, you've now tuned it down to the note C or something. Now you are in C standard tuning because you took all of your strings and you tuned them all down by the same amount. A drop tuning would be like if we took our guitar that was in E standard tuning, E, A, D, G, B, E, and we took the thickest string E and we tuned it down by 2 semitones. Now you'd have D, A, D, G, B, E. The reason that you might do this is because now it is easier to play power chords on your guitar, which, as I mentioned in the grunge comment, was kind of like the thing that you should know how to play on guitar if you just want to get by playing pretty much everything. Those are kind of the 2, strata of tunings, or whatever you want to call it. And the reason that a lot of times you want to down tune your guitars is usually because in metal music and heavy music, it just sounds more aggressive is the perception. Yeah, low tuned guitars equals aggression and rage and energy. This next question comes from Dan Lane. When drummers are playing, they're wearing headphones. Are they listening to the song without drums and filling in the pieces, or what? That is another excellent question. They're in-ear monitors, and if you are wearing them, chances are you are using backing tracks, which just means that you can hear all of the background music that's going on in the song. You also almost 100% have a click track, which is just a metronome that's going to keep you on time with the rest of the song. You also will be able to hear your other bandmates most of the time. So whatever your bandmate is using to get their sound to come through the front of house that you, the audience, can hear them, they're taking a piece of that signal and sending it to your in-ear monitor so that you can hear everybody else. Some people even get fancy with it and they add in what are called cues, which just means that there's a little voice recording that comes in at a new part of a song. So you'll be playing your drums, you got your in-ears in, you can hear the band, you can hear the backing tracks, the click track, and then you hear chorus, 2, 3, 4. And then you're like, okay, I know we're going into the chorus. Christopher Smith asks, how do you lock in with the drummer when playing bass? This is such a cool question. The rhythm section is so heavily dependent on the relationship between the drum and the bass, it's like, cannot be underscored enough. And the short and simple answer is you just lock in with his kick and snare. Every time you hear a kick and a snare, there doesn't always have to be a bass note, but when you do play a bass note, usually that's where you want the really emphatic hits to be. If you think about it, that's basically what an 808 is. An 808 is kind of just a combination of a bass note and a kick drum. And it feels like it hits so hard because those two low frequency instruments are both kind of combining their amplitude to have an even more epic effect. This next question comes from Adam Jarrau. When is a good time to switch from acoustic to electric guitar? I think honestly you should just start with electric guitar. I think it is so much easier than trying to start with an acoustic guitar. Electric guitars are a lot thinner. The necks and the neck profiles and the action of the strings are usually set up a little bit more friendly. You usually have higher access to frets. You're usually able to bend strings a lot more easily. Usually the picking position with how your hand is kind of in proximity to the bridge of your guitar is a lot more manageable and a lot more easy to remember. I almost liken it to trying to learn how to drive a manual transmission car versus an automatic car. You should probably just start with the automatic so you can actually learn how to drive, and then if you want, you can translate those skills over to a manual transmission car. This next question comes from Shane Lamb. How can you train your ear when learning guitar? Ear training skills are gonna translate to any pitched instrument no matter what. Or rhythmically, ear training will just translate from drums to timbale to even to pitched instruments, because pitched instruments also play rhythms. So let's just talk about ear training in general. I think this app called Tenuto is really amazing. I got in on Tenuto and it was free, but now it's like $5. You can also go to musictheory.net, I believe, to use like the free version of Tenuto. There's keyboard ear training. You can even get a reference note if you want. You can change the speed. You can change the instrument, and it'll give you this reference pitch, and then you can try and figure out the intervals between them. You could do normal note ear training. You can do interval ear training, which is when you hear two notes and try and figure out the distance between them. You can do scale training, and you can do chord training. So I think that is an amazing place to start for ear training. But you should probably have a somewhat familiar idea with how to actually play your instrument first. Knowing note names, knowing what an interval even is, knowing what a chord is. This next question comes from Edward Sisson. When musicians ask for riders for their dressing rooms, are they being obnoxious, or are these genuine necessities? Some people are just being obnoxious. We've played some tours with people who are like, I want pot on my rider, or I want like Mike and Ike's, but only the Ike's. Some of the things are a little bit more necessary, like singers usually ask for like warm water or something like that. That's kind of necessary, you know, that's pretty helpful. Some bands sometimes are like, well, just in case we don't have time to eat, let's ask for some food. We used to always ask for like Uncrustables, and we almost never got them, but we'd ask for them. This next question comes from Don McMahon. What happens when musicians make mistakes during performance? Well, it really depends on who makes the mistake. If a guitar player or bass player makes a mistake, most of the time it's kind of inconsequential, only because they can usually figure out through context clues where they need to be. Again, it all depends so much on what kind of mistake you're talking about, but I'm thinking like if a guitar player plays a wrong chord or something like that, they can usually kind of figure out where they need to be. It's definitely more consequential when a singer makes a mistake. It's a lot more noticeable too. Forgetting words or being off pitch, that's tough to recover from. I would say that's like a pretty legitimate anxiety. People have their eyes on singers a lot more than they do the other musicians too, which just does not help that case. Drummers making mistakes can be somewhat inconsequential, but it can also be extremely consequential. I've made some pretty terrible mistakes in my life playing drums, and they have come from one or two places. One is when we're using backing tracks, and for some weird reason, something stops backing tracks. I've had a tambourine that was sitting on my hi-hat and hitting my hi-hat pedal, and I've had it fly through the air and hit pause on our tracks, and then all of a sudden you have all of the beef of your song just go away, especially because that's when I was playing with my band Conquer Castles, and we don't have a bass player, so all the bass was gone. all the backing tracks are gone, all the background vocals are gone, and in that case, you just have to finish the song. There's nothing else you can do. You can't start the tracks up back in the middle of a song. I've also forgotten changes in a song before, and all you can do in that situation is just be like, I'm just gonna look at the other people and just try and figure out where the hell I am. It's rare, because if you're well rehearsed, that shouldn't happen, but it does happen. Most of the time, I will say, like 90% of mistakes I've made in my life, nobody has ever noticed, and if they did notice, they did not give a shit. Next question comes from Curtis Dennis. When musicians collaborate on songs, are they restricted to artists that are on the same label? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. I guess it kind of depends. I'll speak from my personal experience. We did collaborations with people who are, I guess I'm just gonna say they're within our music circle, our record label circle. Sometimes they were on imprints, not on the exact label. Sometimes they were just like label adjacent or shared similar management, though it can happen like cross-label, cross-management, cross-platform or whatever. The sad thing about collaborations that I've found in my personal experience is that they're not usually collaborations. They're usually just somebody saying, we want you to be on this song, here's what you have to do. You don't really go and meet that person, you don't really talk to them, or if you do get to talk to them, only like one person gets to talk to them, like the singer or something. You don't really have to, or get to give any real input on what you want, and you don't really get to do a lot of like the fun stuff that you would think about when it comes to collaborating. However, when you're like a very, very big, prominent artist who maybe has a little bit more autonomy or power in the matter, you definitely can actually collaborate with people and like invite them to come do stuff and pitch ideas back and forth, and that sounds awesome. I've just never really gotten to do that. On the cover band side of things, collaborations are so easy. We're not on a record label, we just send a text to them, say, do you want to do this? And then we can just say like, sure, or no, not really. And we can go back and forth on song ideas. We can split up stuff however we want. There's literally nobody to say what we can and can't do. This next question comes from Randy Pratt. Why do people care when singers use auto-tune? Don't they want it to sound the best that it can? That is such a good question. You can ask so many famous producers like Charlie Puth and other amazing singers. Everybody uses auto-tune. Everybody's been using auto-tune since I think 1997 when the first iteration of it was introduced. And yes, it does kind of go without saying that musicians back in the day, in general, like if you look at the bands like Kansas or Guns N' Roses, they were tighter. They had a lot less musical aid to help them. But autotune is just a part of everyday life, and it does not affect the legitimacy of music, I think, in almost any capacity. A really simple analogy that I was given one time is that it'd be like if you made everybody who plays guitar play a fretless guitar without legitimately quantizing and hard snapping and tuning technology. It would just be damn near impossible to get anything done if you did not have devices like autotune. But also, manual tuning exists. So like when I mix vocals for people, I manually tune them, which just means I have technology analyze their vocal wave file, and then it'll tell me what pitch they're on, if they're a little bit flat, a little bit sharp, and I can just very minimally or more drastically adjust the pitch. You can adjust the vibrato, you can adjust the pitch drift, you can adjust the gain. But yeah, I appreciate this question because it sounds like it's coming from an honest place, and autotune should not at all be looked down upon. Anyway, thank you all for watching so much. I hope you enjoyed the series. I'd love to do it again if I could find some more interesting questions, and I will see you in the next one.